these analysis that we give one with another when it comes to absolutes, something that is absolute, good and evil, right and wrong, and east and west. The possibly it's these analysis could be an inadequate approach to areas of differences, and it has become a standard practice, and one tries to find balance. The there is some possibly a little bit of what we say we don't, what we are against. It's a little bit of that is in us, within us all. There is some a little bit of integration in us and us all, and instabilities become start to overlap. We start to place over reliance on binary opposition, on over reliance on being opponents at odds with one another. You can be inspired by customs of other people. However, the cruelty in which a practice is could be a cultural trait of your own. Good and evil and absolute. These theological conceptions, and dogma of most religions set up certain standards of behavior, which suggest that there is an absolute good and evil. Such standards are like codes, and quite relative to human reference and conception, because the past is just a reference point and not a place of residence, and that which is conceptual is an idea, and doesn't mean that it's factual, and the conception of good is basically psychological. It's related to you go to the doctor, you get an evaluation of one's personal experience, and that also leads to developing a ideology and of one's personal experience, and therefore it could lead to not only a conflict of interest but a personality conflict. But yes, people worship that one's personality. And we know that a person is that through which sound is made. It is associated with a persona. But this evaluation, when you go to the doctor, they say that the doctor, check your vital signs, So it's, they say, well, where you grow up at, your environment, And they say, oh, I see what the problem is. So environment has major influence, leadership, culture, business, religion. Yes, they have major influence, possibly one or two more, So, but you got to take a very serious look at all of them when they become destructive, So the term good and all that which produces pleasing is gratifying one's sensations, sensationalism, that which furthers us physically, mentally, and physically, uh, you know, um, we term good, the gratifying of one's sensations, in the way that is expressed, we term it as good. Then we have the so-called moral good. It is as like an emotional, intellectual satisfaction. This I'm extracting from Ralph M. Lewis' book Mental Alchemy. Then there's a person for religious or other reasons establish a code of behavior. They call it a code of ethics. Remember, it is maybe quite relative. It's relative, but human when it comes to a human reference and conception. What he or she is referencing and what he or she is able to conceive. The idea of something as being good and evil, and that's contingent upon his understanding. And out of understanding comes consciousness. It's limitedness in one's thinking, and because we say it is the so-called moral good, the emotional intellectual satisfaction. It intellectually satisfies one to say that the big fish swallows up the small fish. This is a hypothesis, but that's how far one has went in his or her thinking, and in the manner way in which he or she structure his analysis is done so in opposition. He sees something that is in opposition to himself. And probably he has a reference point, a human reference point of he himself being in opposition to himself, and which is the incorrect attitude that one should have about himself. So he's divided. He's divided with himself in his thinking, and some will call it compartmentalized thinking. But that's another ball game within itself. But yeah, so it becomes a code of behavior, and how some people in certain thinking says that there's certain codes that people have in the streets, as they would call it. And I know people can, when you think of streets, and I am referencing streets out there in a certain community, but you can look at Wall Street too as well, and you see how the thinking of conceptualized when one says streets, one think of the streets in a neighborhood, but there is something called Wall Street. When we look at the word wall, there is a sense of protection. So there needs to be some code of ethics that offers one's protection, and what is one is protecting. Is it his rational? Is it self-interest? Is it healthy? That which he or she is protecting, and I think that one is protecting is the his intellectual self-satisfaction. Yes, that which he is protecting. So, and then he or she behaves in that manner, and it becomes a way of life. Yeah. And so therefore, if you come and violate that intellectual the gratifying or the gratifying of sensations, of the sensations that which he feels, sensationalism of his intellectual satisfaction. Um, he sees you as an opponent, and therefore you and that particular individual will become at odds, at one another. This is how people in society, how we have learned to structure our analysis, where it's that it becomes very obscure. The other individual will become very obscure, which means it gives new meaning to Ralph Ellison book, The Invisible Man, which means, you become invisible at the expense of me becoming visible. And we can see how that plays out in the society and the culture in which we live in, how we see certain people who are celebrated, how they are, anything happens, they are more visible because they're seen to be of more value. And this is how people have structured their analysis of who and what has meaning and value, and therefore it creates a energy of opposition, one for another, and you see the term of rich and poor. Historically, we can see that it creates people at odds with one another, and creates a term of opposition. So we say that we will always be at odds with one another. So that is they'll reference something that they have read in the book, and they will accept it as so. That does not necessarily mean that's absolute, that's the case. When they say, well, you find me another reference point that you can prove that we will always be at odds with one another. Well, it's in your thinking, it's in your thinking, it's in your attitude, and it's that which you have adopted and accepted as if it is so. And it could be a what is called a fallacy, yes, and a false dichotomy is informed in an informal fallacy based on a premise that is erroneous or erroneous, and when people create erroneous limits, and determine what you should think and how you should think, because these limits have been placed on us. So we reference those limits that has been placed on us by others. Yes. So the source of the fallacy lies not in an invalid form of inference, but in a false premise. Yes, a false premise. So that's why I say we need to learn to reason from the premise of conversation. Yes. So back to this here. So when this moral code or this behavior that one has adapted in this structural analysis of opposition, how over-reliance is on this, opposition. And it seemed to be how crucial to certain people and how they even structure their thoughts, the manner and way in which they think. Yes. So the conduct that one must behave, it is that which is required is the fulfillment of the moral precept, and is intellectual and emotionally satisfying, and consequently is accepted as good. Yes. So because it has been accepted as good, and then and the opposition of that is evil. So the such a positive state or quality, because that which is lost is when we take out one's good intentions for granted, and a quality life, a favorable condition. And if we are bombarded with toxins in the environment in which we reference media, press, and television, and in those whom within our environment we can't think outside of it, and they become our reference point. And then therefore we will consume things and take in things that is really detrimental to our health, in opposition to us being able to reason with progression and reason from the premise of conversation. It is in opposition to our growth and development. So therefore our growth becomes stunted. Yes. And I think one brother said, I think Dennis talks about how we need to, work on things that we models that we do have, instead of promote those that which we don't have. I think he called that to think otherwise. He called it a deficit perspective. Yes. So yeah, man. We need to continue to work on not using one another as a stepping stone. If you are of that you are a representative of a idea of a not so much the idea, but of a people at the expense of you being more visible at the expense of making people invisible. What non-void, very challenging. So simply put it, in this mind, when it comes to good and evil, it says that evil is that which injures the opposite of pleasure for the human being. Because I realize, if I think about it, and I look at this pleasure in this society, pleasure without responsibility is not good. But I think that we're here to be responsible with pleasure. I think that far too many. And then when you're not, you become, there is a lack of accountability, and the word moral comes into play. Moral culture decline, they call it recidivism, because lack of accountability. Yes. So yes, the pleasure for the human being, the disagreeable and harmful are thus evil. It is like we can generalize things in instance of specifics, if I may use this language. But the key to that is we must look at the bigger picture. For example, I can make a point I can use, go to a lower level, but referencing something higher. How can I best explain this? In regards of looking at the bigger picture, we could constantly go back and forth with one another on a war of words. And then the war of words leads to a physical confrontation, because we have not looked at the bigger picture. If you look at the word drama, and we will see that it's not just for entertaining purposes only, because people like to be entertained by things that they do not understand, but it is designed for people to reflect on their morals and their politics and reflect on life. You know what I'm saying? And it's required for us to be accountable. So if there is a distance, that we distance each other from being accountable. Now, who the confrontation is, who will lead the way? Will it be the rulers, or such as the kings, or some will call it the prophets, or who will lead the way? In regards to the emerging of becoming one, and not putting over emphasis and over reliance on structuring our thinking and our attitude and our behavior, and as seeing each other as opponents, and are not allowing other toxins or anything else to come into our lives that will see man and woman as opponents, husband and wives, create expressions like rich and poor, minimum wage, wealth and poverty. That there must be a balance, and it comes to at least get to a point of egalitarianism, and beyond that, and not have a faulty notion or a premise that is based on a fallacy. You know what I'm saying? And there's a lot that can be said in this wise, as it pertains to not seeing each other as opponents, and structuring our lives and our analysis on being in opposition to one another. So that's why I always say I try to come in a spirit of cooperation. And for me, leadership is coordination. And the authority which I speak from is resiliency. Because biologically, all those sperm cells and those who are present made it, and those in the future and the future will make it, and those in the past have made it. And it gets out of the thing of what they call creator or God. And I say resiliency because resiliency is the author of success. So may we continue to be resilient and that wise. Until next time, talk to you.